go again with another long and very dense double portion. The focus today will be on Parashat Chukat because we find several direct quotations and allusions to this portion in the Brit. And this means that, number one, this portion must be important, and two, you need both. You need the Torah and the Brit to understand the Messianic types and shadows and their fulfillment in Yeshua. And we'll hopefully get to a little bit of Balak, some basics. So there'll be at least a little Balak 2 next week. So I start off with a short summary of Parashat Chukat. It starts with the laws of the red heifer. So the portion opens with the laws of the Para Aduma. Then we have the death of Miriam. After 40 years of wandering, Miriam dies at Kadesh, and then the people have no water and complain. Moshe strikes the rock twice instead of speaking to it as it commanded, resulting in God decreeing that neither Moshe nor Aharon will enter the promised land. Edom refuses passage through its territory. Aharon dies at Mount Hor and is succeeded by his son Eleazar. Then we have Israel's first successful Cherem war against the king of Arad, who had attacked Israel and taken some Israelites prisoner. And we are going to talk about Cherem, the total annihilation, total destruction, wars of destruction later on, not today. Then we have the very important passage of the serpent on the pole. Following the people's complaints about the manna, God afflicted the Israelites with venomous snakes, and the people for the first time commit that they have sinned, and then God instructs Moshe to craft a copper serpent and place it on a pole. And we'll spend some time on this one. Then the Israelites achieve highly significant military victories over the two Amorite kings, Sihon and Og of Bashan, after their refusal of passage through their territory. And before I forget, I want to mention from now on, we're going to hear about the Amorites quite a bit, very often. Pay attention to this, because we are now at the stage in the narrative where we go back to Genesis 15, where now the iniquity of the Amorites is complete, so that the Amorites now come full circle, they come center stage. So this is important because this is fulfillment of prophecy. And then Parashat Chukat ends with the Israelites camping in the plains of Moab on the east coast of the Jordan, opposite of Jericho, and of course with Baal Peor. Okay, so I'm going to focus more on the deeper, the not so obvious issues in these familiar narratives, the more cosmic issues in these Torah portions, the bigger picture. Okay, Numbers 19, verse 2. First, this is the ordinance of the law. Zot Chukat HaTorah. So let's cover the basics and begin by clarifying what a chok is. And I'll have to keep everything short today because there is so much territory to cover. The divine commandments of Torah, the mitzvot, can be divided into three subcategories. We have mishpatim. Mishpatim are laws given for a clearly specified reason. So these are logical laws. Like, for example, to give charity, care for the orphans and the widows, prohibition against theft and murder. And sometimes mishpatim is consider translated judgments. Then we have hukim, from chok or hukah, the feminine form. On the other hand, are statutes given without a reason, edicts, or divine decrees. And the classic example of the chok is regarding the para aduma, the red heifer, the laws of the red heifer, the laws of sha'at, the mixing of linen and wool, or the laws of kosher, the laws of kashrut, etc., or purity. And this word is sometimes translated as ordinances, decrees, or statutes. And then we have the edot. Edot are testimonials from the word edah, witness, that commemorate or represent something. For example, the commandments to observe Shabbat, the Moedim, to wear tzitzit, tefillin, matzah on Pesach, blow the shofar, and so on. Okay, now let's get to the red heifer, the para aduma. This is the ordinance of the law, Zot Chukat HaTorah. Chumash has, this is the decree of the Torah. Next. This section of the red heifer, the para aduma in Numbers 19, is introduced with a most extraordinary phrase, assigning unique significance to this ritual. This is the decree or the ordinance of the Torah, appears to make the ritual surrounding the red heifer the seminal decree of the entire Torah. And to show you how unusual the phrase is, the established formula is, this is the Torah or the law of, Zot, Torah, and then whatever. For example, Zot Torah ha'olah. So this is the Torah or the instruction of the elevation offering. Or Zot Torah ha'tzara'at. This is the Torah of tzara'at, of leprosy. The context of this statement concerns the red heifer, the para aduma, and the law of purification from contamination of contact with death. So why does the Torah not say, this is the decree of the red heifer, Zot Torat para aduma? Zot Chukat HaTorah, this phrase is only used 2 times in Torah, here and in Numbers 31:21, where Moshe and Eleazar went outside the camp to meet the Israelite men after the war with that death against the Midianites, to remind and to teach them about the necessary purification rituals for the booty and the people, to make sure that no trace of death remains before they could enter or re-enter the camp in which the presence of God resides. So this is the decree of the Torah. There are questions. What does that mean? Why the emphasis? And I'm just asking questions. Is there a link between the decree of the para aduma, the red heifer, concerning the purification from death, and the entire meaning of the Torah? Is understanding this decree the gateway to the whole Torah? Is this decree meant to be the key to unlocking the whole Torah? Does the Torah imply that this hak constitutes the essence of all the commandments? So, just questions. The Talmud says that of all these 613 commandments of the Torah, this is the only one that wise King Solomon could not figure out. Why? Because the sacrifice of the red heifer does not fit the pattern of any of the other sacrifices given in the Torah. Number 1, it required a completely red cow. This is the only sacrifice in Torah that specifically required a female animal and a particular color. 2, it was the only sacrifice where the slaughter and the burning took place outside the camp, later the temple, which ordinarily was prohibited by Torah law. It was the only sacrifice where all the rituals were carried out outside the camp or the temple. That is, the blood applications of this sacrifice occurred in a location apart from the brazen altar, the tabernacle. Number 4, it was the only sacrifice that ritually contaminated the priest who officiated it and everybody involved, but made the one who was sprinkling it clean. And this in Judaism is called the para paradox. The items used to cleanse the person healed from tzara'at, from leprosy, biblical leprosy, cedar wood, crimson, hyssop, were burnt along with the sacrifice. 6, it was the only sacrifice where the ashes were preserved and used, and other sacrifices required the ashes to be disposed in a clean place outside the camp. And the ashes of the sacrifice were gathered and mixed with mayim chaim, with living water, to create the mei nida, the waters of separation. The ashes were then divided into 3 parts. One part was kept at the temple, one part on the Mount of Olives, and one part divided among the 24 priestly courses and kept in their location of residence to purify the people in their vicinity. Number 7, it was the only sacrifice in Torah that explicitly cleansed from contact with death. Anyone or anything that came into contact with a corpse, which is the embodiment of sin and death, was required to be cleansed using the waters of separation or the waters of purification. Because we have the extreme opposites of life and death, and God is life, and death has to be separated. For first fruits of Zion. In the legal terminology of the Talmud, the sages refer to the dead body as a, quote, father of fathers of uncleanness. In other words, the dead body is the highest source of ritual impurity. And remember, being unclean is not a sin. Judaism regards attending to the dead and escorting them to burial as a great mitzvah. Ritual impurity has relevance only in regard to entering the sanctuary and handling the holy gifts and sacrifices. And the Torah explains this pertinent issue in Numbers 19, verse 13. Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of Yahweh. That person shall be cut off from Israel. So, not puring oneself from contact with death and approaching the tabernacle defiles the tabernacle of Yahweh, and that gets the severe punishment of being cut off. So, if the Para Aduma is the decree of the Torah, and the Torah is all about Messiah, as he claims, then the understanding of the unique red heifer sacrifice is of great significance for all believers. If we leave Yeshua out of the picture, the many questions concerning this sacrifice cannot be answered, and it remains a chok, a supranatural decree too lofty for the human mind, as the Jewish sages claim. And we understand why the Jewish commentators are still having a hard time interpreting it. It is one of their blind spots, and they are left with many, many unanswered questions, like the former chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Yisrael Meir Lau. Quote, why specifically a cow? Why specifically red? Why must it be one which had never worn a yoke? Why do the ashes purify men? We don't have definitive answers to these questions. They are all in the hands of God. End quote. As believers in Yeshua as the promised Messiah, we should be able to see that he is the fulfillment and substance of this unique type of quote-unquote sacrifice. Also, the expression para aduma is only mentioned once in all of the Tanakh. And there is only one more reference in the Brit to the ashes of the red heifer. Next. Hebrews 9:13-15. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this reason, he is the mediator of the new covenant by means of death for the redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. According to rabbinic tradition, 9 red heifers were sacrificed in Jewish history. According to Messianic and Christian theological interpretations, Yeshua is identified as the 10th and final red heifer, fulfilling the purpose of the ritual through his sacrificial death rather than a literal animal sacrifice. This view argues that just as the biblical red heifer was without blemish, sacrificed outside the camp, and its ashes provided purification from death, so Yeshua's sinless life, crucifixion outside of Jerusalem, and his blood provide eternal spiritual cleansing, rendering further animal sacrifices obsolete. Traditional Jewish rabbinic sources, such as those cited by Maimonides, Middle Ages, maintain that the 10th red heifer will be sacrificed by the Messiah at the time of the rebuilding of the third temple. But we believe, according to the book of Hebrews and other places, that this prophecy was already fulfilled by Yeshua's first coming. Consequently, many believers hold that the search for the literal 10th red heifer is unnecessary, as the spiritual temple of believers is now cleansed by Yeshua's once-for-all sacrifice. Which brings me to the update. After the debacle of the 5 imported Texas red heifers, here we go again. Next. We've seen that before, right? A red heifer named Tamima was born on June 14th, 2026, just a little over a month ago, at a dairy farm in the Galilee region. The birth resulting from artificial insemination by Shai Givon, a specialist in artificial insemination. And because of artificial insemination, I call these heifers GMO heifers. This heifer is considered significant because the calf was born in the land of Israel, overcoming rabbinical objections regarding the 5 heifers imported from Texas in 2022, which caused a lot of chaos. The Temple Institute and the National Red Heifer Institute have announced the calf as a potential quote-unquote 10th red heifer, viewing its birth during ongoing military tensions as a divine sign. And I put 3 big question marks behind this interpretation. However, the heifer's eligibility is currently under halakhic review due to a pierced ear from an identification tag. And here are some key details regarding the current status. And they include the physical qualifications. The calf was examined, as we see here in the image, by Rabbi Azariah Ariel, and found to be completely red with no other colored hairs. So we've had that many, many times before. Then there is the halakhic dispute. The primary concern is whether the ear tag wound constitute a permanent blemish. The tag was removed immediately, and the wound is healing rapidly with special cream, but scholars are debating if the mark will leave a permanent defect, or if this is, no matter if it's healed or not, if this is considered a defect. So we have two camps here. Then concerning the future timeline, if the heifer remains unblemished and reaches the required age of 2 years, a purification ceremony could theoretically occur around mid-2028, depending on national halachic backing, means that they agree, and the identification of a qualified pure priest. Okay, so that's an update. That's more than enough. Next, all the events that we have read about up to the description of the red heifer took place over the first 2 years of Israel's time in the wilderness. And the detailed instructions concerning the ashes of the red heifer, which opens Parashat Chukat, divides Israel's wilderness experience between the first 2 years and the final, the 40th year in the wilderness. Numbers 20, verse 1. Next. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. So the death of Miriam is recorded in Numbers 1, and I don't have the scriptures here. I forgot this. And Miriam died, and there was no water for the congregation. So the death of Miriam marks the first event of the 40th year. In Jewish tradition, Miriam has a strong association with water, including her involvement in saving Moshe at the Nile, singing praise to God after crossing the Yam Suf, and the special well of spring of water called in later Jewish tradition the well of Miriam. And in her merit, this well miraculously provided water for the Israelites by accompanying them throughout their wanderings in the wilderness. So when Miriam died, the well disappeared, and the people contended with Moshe. So this is just a brief note. Miriam died, and there was no water, and the people contended with Moshe. Let's see what the Targums have to say. First Targum, there are many, and I'm only giving you two here. Palestinian Targum on 20, verse 1 and 2. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel came to the desert of Zin on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Okay, here we have a date. And as on the account of the innocency of Miriam, a well had been given. So when she died, the well was hidden, and the congregation had no water. Here is the tradition of Miriam's well. So, according to this tradition, Miriam died on the 10th of Nisan. Moshe and Aharon and the rest of the family would have been sitting Shiva. That meant 7 days of intense mourning. And I think we can safely assume that during this time, the people would not have bothered Moshe and Aaron with anything for 7 days. So provided that this is correct, we can understand that after the 7 days of sitting Shiva, on the 17th of Nisan, the situation would have reached a crisis point. No more water. Now what? So, and here we have a very interesting Passover connection. When Miriam died, the water ceased to flow. If Miriam died on the Nisan 10th, and if Moshe and Aaron mourned for 7 days before striking the rock, an amazing correlation between the story of the rock and the story of the resurrection emerges. Messiah rose from the dead on the 17th of Nisan. This is usually considered Resurrection Day. So if Miriam died on the 10th of Nisan and Moshe and Aaron waited 7 days before striking the rock, then the water flowed forth afresh, new life-giving water on the 17th of Nisan, the same day on which Messiah left the tomb on Resurrection Day. So, and then we have another Targum concerning the water from the rock. Next. '20, verse 8, take the rod of the miracles and gather the congregation, thou and Aharon thy brother, both of you, adjure the rock by the great and manifest name, while they look on, and it shall give forth its waters. But if it refuse to bring forth, smite thou it once with the rod that is in thy hand, and thou wilt bring out water for them from the rock, that the congregation and their cattle may drink. Okay, the rod of the miracles, this must refer to the rod of Aaron that blossomed and bloomed and brought forth fruit. And the great and manifest name, so that they did this by invoking the name of Yahweh. So here the Targum is trying to explain why Moshe and Aharon were punished so severely. So to answer one of those questions. Okay. Next, water from the rock. Numbers 20, verse 8. Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock and give drink to the congregation and their animals. Timhek. In fact, the language in our parsha is most curious, for it speaks of the rock from which water would flow. Ha-Selah, with a definite article. In the Midrash, the sages teach that the rock from which the water sprang forth, in the first instance, followed the Israelites through the wilderness, and that when Miriam died, the water from the rock ceased to flow. That is according to Midrash Rabbah, Numbers 1 and 2. Next. I have here some information on Midrash. The Midrash Rabbah is not a cohesive work, but a collection from different authors in various locales in different historical areas. And here you see, no, the one before. This one, yes. Here you see that Midrash Shmot Rabbah and Bamidbar Rabbah are the two latest from the 12th century. And whenever we talk about Midrash and when that is quoted, we need to know from what time period this is. So, and these are very, very late. And of course, they always include earlier materials, but the timing here is important. Tim Hegg says, I think it is very possible that this later Midrash was written vis-a-vis Paul's statement in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 through 4, to make it appear as though Paul had utilized an earlier rabbinic tradition and misapplied it to Yeshua as the Messiah. Next, this is what 1 Corinthians 1 through 10 says. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moshe in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Messiah. Paul's point was that in the same way that God miraculously supplied water during the wilderness wanderings, so the life-giving water of salvation flows from Messiah. Note as well the added statements in Midrash Rabbah, Exodus 3:13, in which it is taught that when Moshe struck the rock, as recorded in our Parsha, it first brought forth blood, and only afterwards came the water. Next. Here's the quote from Midrash Rabbah, Exodus 3:13. As it is written, hear now, defiant ones. And he struck the stone and extracted water, as is stated. Behold, he struck the rock, and water flowed out. Vaya zuvu. Vaya zuvu is an expression of nothing other than blood, as it states. And then they quote their proof text. If a woman will have a flow, Yazuvzov of her blood, quoting Leviticus 15:25. That is why he struck the stone twice, as initially it produced blood and finally water. So according to this midrash, the rock needed a second strike. Continuing with Tim Hegg next. Once again, it appears to me that the later midrash is attempting to undermine Paul's words by giving a supposed historical description of the rock, which has nothing to do with Yeshua as the Messiah. Surely the historical fact of Yeshua's death and resurrection would have been known among the diaspora Jewish communities in the post-destruction era, and it seems inevitable that the emerging rabbinic Judaism would do all in its power to counter the message of emerging Christianity by taking the words of the apostles and making it appear that the rabbinic teachings predated what someone like Paul had written. In fact, that the later midrash refers to blood coming forth from the rock surely reminds one of John's recounting of the crucifixion. John 19:34. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. So this is the only scripture where blood and water appear together. While Paul claims that the water from the rock was actually the very work of Yeshua, the Midrash incorporates both blood and water, apparently to claim that even the description of Yeshua's crucifixion was a morphing of a supposed earlier rabbinic tradition. So the point is, whenever we talk about here or cite Midrashim, it is always important to consider who came first, the hen or the egg. Okay? We've done that many times, and we probably will many more times. Next, the serpent on the pole. This passage, which is Numbers 21, verses 4 through 9, has always been and still is a problem passage. Other than several language issues, the big question is, why did God tell Moshe to fashion a serpent on a pole, especially in light of the fact that the Israelites were strictly forbidden in the Decalogue by Yahweh himself to produce any carved image, and especially after the creation of the golden calf, which ended in a debacle? Why is this such a big issue? And this is where these terms come in. Because in the ancient Near East, an image of a god or a goddess could be theriomorphic, meaning in the form of an animal, anthropomorphic, in the form of a human, or therianthropic, an animal-human hybrid. Keep this in mind. So let's first look at the story. Then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Eden, and the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way. So Edom denied the Israelites passage. So now we have to look at a map, what that means, to explain why they were so discouraged. And what would you have done? Next, we have a map. Yes. You see, can you see Mount Hor, more or less in the middle to your left? And then it goes all the way, the yellow line. This is the way of the Red Sea. Well, they've been there before. So once again, they are going back. This is the 40th year they are going back one more time and have to make a huge detour around the land of Edom. So this is why they were very discouraged. And this is also one of the reasons why they complained. Okay, next. And the people spoke against God and against Moshe. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. This is a first, because here the you, why have you, is in the plural. Very often it says spoke against God and Moshe, but then the you is singular, but here it is plural. So it is a direct affront against God. So Yahweh sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. So that was instant karma, no warning. Therefore the people came to Moshe and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahweh and against you. Pray to Yahweh that he take away the serpents from us. This is the first time that we read of Israel's confession, we have sinned. And here we find out, here they have to find out in a literal, very painful way, even in a lethal way, that they have sinned against Yahweh, the one who causes things to be. In this case, snakes. And here we have to remember, snakes and scorpions were there all the time. They did not suddenly appear, but they were held back. And now Yahweh let them come out. So this is a milestone. They confess their sin and acknowledge their guilt. Now they realize that they are completely helpless and hopeless in their sin before Yahweh's righteous wrath. There is nothing they can do. And they realize and admit that apart from Moshe's intercession on their behalf, they will all die. So Moshe prayed for the people. What did Moshe pray? Of course, we don't know. But I would suggest something like, Yahweh, God of Israel, please forgive your people. Please take away the serpents from your people, Israel. And what did Yahweh do? What did Yahweh do to meet the people's needs? Nothing. The people's perceived need was to get rid of the snakes. Yahweh did not do that. They were bitten and many died. Instead of reacting to their need and provide, as he had done in previous instances, this time he reacted to their ungratefulness and their faithlessness. So what was their real need from God's perspective? They needed faith and trust to defeat their faithlessness and their lack of trust. Considering the fact that they were able to look back on 40 years now of God's daily provision, they needed to finally get it, to understand who he is and who they are. Then Yahweh said to Moshe, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. The importance of each individual's faith is highlighted in this episode. God required that each individual who was bitten to use their own faith and look up at the bronze serpent to be healed and live. So Moshe made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. So, again, questions. How long do you think did it take Moshe to make this thing? Whatever it may have looked like. A couple of hours, a day, By the time Moshe was done, hundreds or maybe thousands more people had died. So why not a quick fix? Why not use incense? Why not use Aaron's rod that had budded? Why not use Moshe's rod, turn it into a snake and then back into a rod, etc., or whatever else? If a sign or if a visual was needed, why not use something simple, something quick, something that was there, something that was available? Just questions. And next, I have a quote from a Moroccan rabbi, Or HaChaim, who lived in the late Middle Ages. And he expresses these questions, these many unanswered questions. Furthermore, we must try to understand why God decreed an object such as this, which resembled a form of idol, had to be made altogether, and why looking at it would heal a person who had sustained a bite. Our sages in Rosh Hashanah 29 claim that as long as the Israelites looked heavenward, this was a demonstration of their faith in God. If indeed this was all God had in mind, why did he not order them to look straight at heaven instead of looking at the snake as an intermediary? Interesting question. So not only the rabbis are still struggling with this text thousands of years after the event. So then the question has to be, what meaning did the Israelites assign to Moshe's bronze serpent image? What were they seeing? What were they thinking, or what were they not thinking? And for that, we need to take ourselves out of the picture. Here we have to take different aspects into consideration. First, the general ancient Near Eastern cultural context. Snake iconography and mythology were found all over the ancient world. Then the specific Israelite experience, and then Yeshua's expanded application. Next, let's look at the cultural context. What would they have thought? They were familiar with Egypt, so they were familiar with that kind of serpent or serpents. On the function of the snake, I have a quote from an article in a theological journal, Snake Iconography, Mythology, and the Meaning of the Bronze Snake Image in Numbers 21, 4-9. Quote, the claim of ubiquity is supported further by the diverse functions that snake images served in the societies in and around ancient Israel. Snake amulets were worn to repel venomous species. The Urias cobra, this is what we see on the headdress of the pharaoh, worn on the diadem of the Egyptian monarch, protected the king and the pantheon alike. Apotropaic figurines and jewelry warded off evil, while snake images embellished bowls, and engraved snakes were raised on poles, analogous to Moses' bronze snake raised on a pole. Finally, metallic snake statues were employed in cultic rituals, end quote. So you see that there was a plethora of applications of snakes. And others also claim that snake imagery was associated with healing. There is lots and lots of material out there about this topic alone. Next, let's get some more background. The function of the image resembles a form of homeopathic and apotropaic ritual whereby a votive form of the source of the disease, that's the homeopathic element, is used in a ritual to ward off, which is apotropaism, here, death from snakebite. The use of a copper or bronze serpent in a worship context was found in the excavated remains of a temple to Hathor. Hathor was one of the most powerful goddesses of Egypt. Temple remains from the later Midianite occupation included a 5-inch long copper snake with a gilded head, representative of some deity in the local cult. A coiled copper snake form that was about 8 inches long was excavated at Tel Mevorach in the northern Sharon Plain in Israel, dating to the late Bronze Age, that's around 1200 BC. And some Egyptians wore miniature serpents as amulets in order to prevent snake bites. Sympathetic magic, that is a term that you need to know. The cure for a problem is achieved by fashioning a physical object that relates to the problem, or looks like the problem, or is in some ways associated with the problem in order to combat the problem. One can also produce a certain object in sympathetic magic that would produce a certain result after a certain ritual, end quote. This means the means of life, the means of healing, the means by which God saves his people in the wilderness is in an image that is associated with and reflects the very source of their death and their pain, namely a serpent. And that is another 2-in-1. If we understand all the above and keep it in the back of our minds, then the mystery of one other very bizarre story in the Tanakh can be resolved. And that is 1 Samuel 5. This is the familiar story of the Philistines capturing the Ark of the Covenant and setting it up in the temple of their god Dagon. And then what happens? God afflicts them with tumors and a plague of rats. Next. 1 Samuel 6, 1 through 5. Now the ark of Yahweh was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, What shall we do with the ark of Yahweh? Tell us how we should send it to its place. So they said, If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return it to him with a trespass offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then they said, What is the trespass offering which we shall return to him? And they answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats. So this is the way they knew how to do it, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on your lords. Therefore you shall make images of your tumors and images of your rats that ravage the land, and you shall give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from you, from your gods, and from your land. So this explains it. The serpent on the pole is only mentioned once, and then it disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to it. And again, many questions. How was it to be handled after the incident? Was it only to be used once and then stored away? Or was it to be considered a holy or semi-holy object and treated accordingly because, after all, God had commanded to fashion it? Where was it to be kept? In the camp? Inside the tabernacle? Who was to carry it? Who was responsible for it? The priests? And what about later when the temple was standing in Jerusalem? So these are very valid questions because it suddenly reappears in the narrative of King Hezekiah's sweeping reform 1,000 years plus later, towards the end of the kingdom of Judah. And we have a picture. This is King Hezekiah saying, take this thing out of here. Next, the scripture, 2 Kings 18, verse 4. He removed the high places and broke the sacred pillars, cut down the wooden image and broke in pieces the bronze serpent, the Nachash Nehoshet, HaNehoshet, that Moshe had made, for until those days the children of Israel burned incense to it, and he called it Nehushtan. So according to this scripture, over time, the people of Israel had begun to worship it as an idol. So, of course, we have to ask, how on earth did this happen? And when? And where were the priests? And he called it Nehushtan. He, who? The verb here is singular, so it refers to Hezekiah. And in a derogatory way, Hezekiah called it Nehushtan. Nehushtan, the bronze thing, to obviously indicate its worthlessness, and then he destroyed it. Next, the language problem. In the English, the narrative of the serpent on the pole episode is pretty straightforward. The children of Israel complain, God sends snakes to bite them, many die. Moshe is told to fashion a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. Anyone who was bitten by a snake was to look up and be healed. End of story. But as I mentioned at the beginning, the Hebrew of the passage is not so straightforward. And for the sake of time, we can only look at 2 examples. There are many more. Okay, next. That's verse 7. We have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahweh and against you. Pray to Yahweh that he takes away the serpents from us. This is how the vast majority of translations put it, because it is grammatically correct. But this is not what the people, according to scripture, said. In the Hebrew, they said, take away ha-nachash, the serpent, singular, with a definite article. Question, the serpent, what serpent? And I only found these five translations who have the serpent here in this case, and the Chumash is one of them. Verse 8. Then Yahweh said to Moshe, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. He looks at it, Oto, shall live. And for the gazillionth time, and here notice my use of numbers, for the gazillionth time, and probably not the last time, there technically is no it in the Hebrew language. All nouns are masculine or feminine, so it's he or she, him or her. Nachash is a masculine noun, so on a deeper level, you could translate it, or you could say, when he looks at him, he shall live. Now, that should sound familiar, and this takes us directly to John 3. Next, John 3 is the famous Nicodemus passage. This is the passage that is John 3, 1 through 21, and we are only reading some bits of it. So there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. Verse 3. Yeshua answered and said to him, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, better born from above, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus has no clue what Yeshua is talking about. Verse 9, Nicodemus answers and said to him, how can these things be? Yeshua answered and said to him, Are you the teacher of Israel and do not know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I've told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man who is in heaven. We talked about ascending and descending in the connection, in connection with Jacob's letter, the Sulam. You may remember. Then come verses 14 and 15, and they are direct reference to our Torah portion. And there are two important Greek words here. Verse 14. And as Moshe lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And the first is Saul, which John uses several times. And these are the scriptures, John 8:28. Then Yeshua said to him, When you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing but of myself, but as my Father taught me, I speak these things. And John 12:32-34. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all, and peoples is not there, to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. The people answered him, We have heard from the law that the Messiah remains forever. And how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? So this verb for lift up, psau, has a dual meaning. It means, first of all, the lifting up of Yeshua to the cross. So lifting up becomes synonymous with being lifted up in crucifixion. At the same time, however, the lifting up is also the glorification or the exaltation of the Son of Man, so that the lifting up to crucifixion is synonymous with the lifting up to glorification. In other words, the lifting up of the Son of Man, his crucifixion, is at the same time his glorification or exaltation. The crucifixion of the Son of Man, of the Son of God, is his glorification in the Gospel of John. John gets this idea of this dual meaning of hypsao from Isaiah 52, verse 13. Next. We have Isaiah? Yes. Isaiah 52, verse 13, which is leading up to the famous Isaiah 53, which is the chapter of the suffering servant, the crucifixion, suffering of the servant. Isaiah 52:13 says, Behold, my servant shall deal prudently, he shall be exalted and extol psau, and be very high. Isaiah 52:13 uses the same verb that John then uses 4 times in his gospel to talk about the lifting up of the Son of Man. Now back to the conversation between Yeshua and Nicodemus. Of all the types and shadows, why does Yeshua choose the bronze serpent as an analogy to his crucifixion? And now I'm going to quote Pastor Chad Burt, and he teaches Yeshua through seeing Yeshua through the Torah. And he says, because the bronze serpent is a perfect image of this kind of quote unquote inglorious glory. And I want you to remember this expression, inglorious glory. The serpent, of course, is the image of death. The serpent is the icon of the serpents that have bitten the Israelites, causing them to die at the same time. However, the bronze serpent is the divinely given means by which the people are brought to life and healing. So he combines both of these. He is the image of death, but he's also the image of life combined into another 2 in 1. And that fits perfectly with the inglorious glorification of Messiah in his crucifixion. He is lifted up in terms of crucifixion, and there you have death, and there you have the opposite of glory. And at the same time, however, this lifting up is the glorification of the Son of Man. So, in short, in John's gospel, the lifting up of the Son of Man is his crucifixion, and that crucifixion is at the same time his glorification and exaltation. God hides his glory in this inglorious act, and at the same time manifests his glory. It just so happens that the crucifixion is the ultimate epiphany, the ultimate revelation of how God likes to put his glory into that which seems inglorious, working behind that which appears to be his opposite. So Yeshua's words and his analogy to Moshe's lifting up the serpent in the wilderness are the prelude to what is probably the best known verse in the apostolic scriptures, and that, of course, is John 3:16. Next. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten, better, his unique Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And there are two important words here, and the one word is here translated so, which means utos, and the word for world, which is cosmos. So the first of these is so. The Greek word translated here as so, or before we had it as even so. Utos can mean a couple of different things. It can refer to a degree. God loved the world so much. In that particular understanding, focusing upon the degree of God's love, he loved the world so much. So here's what he did. But utos can also refer to the manner by which God did something. And this is important. That way we translate it like this: God loved the world in this way, or God loved the world in this manner. How? By giving his only Son. That means that the revelation of the love of God is made manifest. The manner by which it is made manifest is the giving of his only Son, so that whoever believes in him may not perish but have eternal life. And because he made the connection back to the serpent on the pole, that particular way, that very specific manner of God dealing with a problem, I tend to believe that this is the better understanding. Secondly, the word world in Greek is cosmos. Why does this fit so well within this particular section of John 3? And here again, we have a trajectory going from Numbers 1 to John 3. In John 3, Yeshua has just used Numbers 21 to talk about how God manifested his love toward the people of Israel. They were dying because of the snake bites, and death was just pervasive in the camp. What did God do? He loved Israel so much that he gave them this means by which they could receive healing. Then you have that particular Numbers 21 episode followed directly by John 3:16, which says, "For God so loved not just Israel, but for God so loved the cosmos, for God so loved the world." So this is much bigger. Or, "For God so loved the world in this way, namely, that he gave his only begotten Son, so that we might not perish, that we might not go into eternal death, but instead that we might have life by believing in his name." There's a great contrast between the focus, the numbers narrative, upon the numbers narrative that exemplifies God's love, and this is, of course, the covenant love, for his covenant people Israel, and then what we have in John 3:16, where God exemplifies his love not just for Israel, but for the entire creation, for the world, the cosmos, which is repeated 4 times in this one verse by giving us his Son. The emphasis is the world, the cosmos. Yeshua uses the symbolism of the serpent on the pole in the wilderness to shift to his much greater work on the cross, which encompasses the whole world. End quote. So this is a perfect example to show once again that we need the Brit scriptures, the Brit interpretation and application to understand the types and shadows and their fulfillment. Torah is not enough. And I'd like to add something here. There is a much more sublime reason, let's call it the cosmic dimension, if you will, why Yeshua chose the serpent on the pole, or i.e., his crucifixion, his inglorious glorification. And I want to quote Michael Heiser from Unseen Realm: the story of the cross is the biblical theological catalyst to God's plan for regaining all that was lost in Eden. It couldn't be emblazoned across the Old Testament in transparent statements. It had to be expressed in sophisticated and cryptic ways to ensure that the powers of darkness would be misled, end quote. And here I want to add another scripture, namely 1 Corinthians 2, verses 6 through 8. Next. However, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, nor the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom, which God ordained or predetermined before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this age knew. For had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Yeshua's encounters with demons in the Gospels make it clear that the powers of darkness knew who he was. They knew that the Messiah had arrived. They address him as the Son of the Most High. However, they did not know by what means and in what way God would accomplish salvation and restoration. They did not know the plan. So they were baited into action, meaning into doing exactly what God wanted done. Okay, I have so many. Oh my goodness. Okay, next. Ovot and Avarim. I introduced that last year for the first time, so this may be new to some of you, but this is very, very important because these are the deeper things in scriptures that you will not see on the surface. Okay, and here we need a little bit of longer introduction as a foundation. The Israelites are about to step into territory east of the Jordan, the promised land, the land of Canaan. These were lands under the dominion of other nations and their gods. And here is literally where the spiritual confrontation begins. And we need to have this in mind. This is the cosmic aspect. This is the much bigger picture. And I'm going to quote several passages from Michael Heiser. First one is Michael Heiser's from the introduction to his book, Demons. To be blunt, Christians embrace, not only Christians, embrace a number of unbiblical ideas about the powers of darkness. The reasons are twofold and are related. First, most of what we claim to know about the powers of darkness does not derive from close study of the original Hebrew and Greek text. That is a major issue, and that is why we need scholars who do the digging. And second, much of what we think we know is filtered through and guided by church tradition, not the original ancient context of the Old and New Testaments. Taken collectively, these two realities mean that our beliefs about Satan and the dark powers are not rooted in these powers' own original context. Bible teachers, and including scholars, are prone to write about the powers of darkness on the basis of English translation. That undermines the nuance found in the original languages. Substituting traditions that emerged after the biblical period for ancient context and conflating ancient language terms into the vocabulary of English translations produces an incomplete and occasionally misleading portrait of the supernatural forces hostile to God and his children. Most English translations use the term demon 3 times in the Old Testament. That's Leviticus 17:7, Deuteronomy 32:17, and Psalms 106:37. Christian readers might wonder why demons are mentioned so infrequently in the Old Testament compared to the New Testament Gospels. But that very question erroneously presumes that the demons of the Old Testament are the same as those encountered in the Gospels. They are not. So this creates the impression and drives the flawed conclusion that the Old Testament has little to say about supernatural powers of darkness, but nothing could be further from the truth. End quote. So Heiser then first covers a range of Hebrew terms in their wider ancient Near Eastern context that identify a supernatural being hostile to God. As far as the Septuagint is concerned, the translators often chose one Greek term to translate different Hebrew terms. And therefore, the New Testament has fewer words for the powers of darkness and loses some of the nuanced presentation of evil spirits in the Old Testament. This is important to know. So, simplified, what that means, when you get to the New Testament, you end up with God and Satan and angels and demons. This is more or less all the terminology or the major terminology that you get. Concerning Elohim, gods, any rival deity other than Yahweh that was worshipped in antiquity was considered an evil power in the biblical worldview. Then he quotes John Walton, and I have this here. This is something you may not know, but you need to know. So, no general term for demon exists in any of the major cultures of the ancient Near East or in the Hebrew Bible. So, they wouldn't even know what you were talking about using this term demon. They are generally considered one of the categories of spirit beings, along with gods and ghosts. The term demon has had a checkered history. In today's theological use, the term denotes beings, often fallen angels, who are intrinsically evil and who do the bidding of their master, Satan. This definition, however, only became commonplace long after the Hebrew Bible was complete. Remember this. Next. Most of the terms we find in the Old Testament can be characterized as either one, terms that are associated with the realm of the dead and its inhabitants, with fearful places associated with that realm or with the threat of death itself, or two, terms associated with geographical dominion by supernatural powers in rebellion against Yahweh, the God of Israel. End quote. And this is important here in our case, in our portion. Among these terms, Heiser lists are two that appear in our parsha. And this is the part we miss because it is hidden in the Hebrew. Some of the terminology for these fearful spirits derive from place names. So that already is a problem because we usually do not pay any attention or very little attention to place names. For example, the geographical area that includes Obod and Avarim, or Ovod and Avarim, in the Transjordan was associated with ancient cults of the dead. Next, here's the scripture, Numbers 21, 10 and 11. Now the children of Israel moved on and camped in Ovod, and they journeyed from Ovod and camped at Iye Ha'avarim in the wilderness, which is east of Moab towards the sunrise. So here we have a map. And this is the only map I could find. This is a very confusing one, but that's the only one I could find where you have these two locations. Of course, whenever we have these locations put somewhere on the map, we need to put a question mark behind them, because you find maps where they are in different places or only one is mentioned or whatever. So here you find it. If you look at between Moab and Edom, you find Ovod and Avarim in the middle to your right. These two names, these two place names, respectively, spirits of the dead, Ovod, and those who have passed over to the netherworld, Avarim, that's what these names mean. And then he quotes a scholar named Sprong. Sprong notes that this particle seems to have a special meaning in the context of the cult of the dead, denoting the spirits of the dead crossing the border between the land of the living and the world of the dead. This is a region, the Transjordan, which shows many traces of ancient cults of the dead, such as the megalithic monuments called dolmens and place names referring to the dead and the netherworld, as follows: Ovod, Peor, and Avarim. These are the three names that occur in our parsha. Next, I have a quote from Douglas Van Dorn from his book, Giant Sons of the Gods. It should be noted that the entire region over which Og ruled, the Bashan, is one of the largest burial fields on the planet, filled with uncounted thousands of dolmens, some of which have capstones weighing over 50 tons. This valley of death is truly stunning. So this is just one in the Golan, in Gog's territory. Next. This is one in South Korea doing the same thing. And next. And this is one in India. So from that, we can conclude that this was done all over the world. And here's a quote from Wikipedia. Do I have this? Yes, I think so. Next. No, I don't. Okay. Concerning a dolmen or a portal tomb is a type of single-chamber megalithic tomb, usually consisting of two or more upright megaliths supporting a large, flat, horizontal capstone or table. Most date from the late Neolithic periods, that 4000 to 3000 BC, and were sometimes covered with earth or smaller stones to form a tumulus or a burial mound. And in many instances, the covering has eroded away, leaving only the stone skeleton. And the etymology of the German word, that is interesting. It's Hünengrab. And Hühne in German means giant, and Grab means grave. So it evokes the image of giants being buried in such a grave. The oldest dolmens found in Western Europe are roughly 7,000 years old. So that's prehistoric. So we have to put a question mark behind this. Who actually knows when they were put up? Although archaeological evidence is unclear regarding their creators, the structures are often associated with tombs or burial chambers. Human remains sometimes accompanied the artifacts associated with, no, artifacts have been found in proximity of dolmen sites. While the remains, the organic remains, can be analyzed with radiocarbon dating, it is difficult to confirm whether said remains coincide with the date of the stones were originally set in place. So, meaning the stones could have been there way, way, way before that time. So, time, when was that? We have no idea. And dolmens in Korea, this is interesting, were built in Korea from the Bronze Age to the early Iron Age, with about 40,000 to be found throughout the peninsula. So, just to give you an idea that there is something going on all over the world, cultures, ancient cultures, and we do not know from when, doing the same thing all over, just as they do or did in the territory that the Israelites are now stepping into. So back to the Transjordan. From the looks of it, dolmens look like portals, like passageways. Therefore, some archaeologists believe that these structures may have been used for burial rituals, which could be considered a form of rite of passage. Passing over, that's what avarim means, from life to the realm of the dead, the Rephaim. This is the spiritual realm, the domain, the environment, or landscape the Israelites are going to penetrate. So this is our cosmic undercurrent that we must not forget. And avarim comes from the Hebrew verb avar, to cross over, from which we also get the word Hebrew, ivri. Now let's get to Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 through 14. When you come into the land which Yahweh your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, an oath, or a spirit, a yiduni, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to Yahweh, and because of these abominations, Yahweh your God drives them out from before you. You shall be blameless before Yahweh your God, for these nations which you will dispossess listened to soothsayers and diviners. But as for you, Yahweh your God has not appointed such for you. So dire warning before they enter the promised land. Next, we continue with Heiser. Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 14 lists a number of abominable practices forbidden to Israel. One prohibition is utilizing the service of Shoel Ov Yiduni, literally of one who inquires of a spirit or a knowing one. Yiduni comes from the verb yada, to know, a knowing one. The term Yiduni means knowing or knowing one, and occurs 11 times, and always with the term of, spirit. English translations at times render this word of as medium, which obscures something of note about its meaning. Several passages clearly have the term referring to the spirit entities being channeled, not to the human channeler. And he gives some examples. Leviticus 19:31. Give no regard to a medium, an oath, and familiar spirits, Hayidunim. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am Yahweh your God. And Heiser puts it this way: do not turn to the spirits, to the ones who have knowledge, the Yidunim. Leviticus 20, verse 6, and the person who turns to mediums, to avoid and familiar spirits, to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people. And Heiser puts it this way: if a person turns to the spirits, to the ones who have knowledge. And one last one, Leviticus 20, verse 27, a man or a woman who is a medium, an oath, or who has familiar spirits, shall surely be put to death, and they shall stone them with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. And Heiser puts it, a man or a woman who has a spirit or a knowing one. The point made here should not escape the reader. While O and Yiduni may at times be used for human mediums, the failure to note that they also refer specifically to supernatural entities results in missing Old Testament terminology for evil spirits. Verse 13 again, you shall be blameless before Yahweh your God for these nations which you will dispossess. Listen to soothsayers and diviners. But as for you, Yahweh your God has not appointed such for you. Meaning, for you there is only one spirit to go to, the Spirit of God, who will guide you into all truth. And who knows what the next verse is. That was verse 13, 15. Verse 15 is, Yahweh your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him shall you hear. This is the go-to person, the go-to spirit. So considering all the above, oh no, I'm going to cut this one out because I want to do some Balak. Okay, we skip this, we go to Balak. Okay, we have an image. Okay, this is from the Temple Institute, so this is Bilam. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and verse 5, then he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor at Petor. So really, really in dark red, that's this year's image of Bilam. And I'm going to quote from Tim Hegg next. This section has been considered one of the most difficult to interpret and apply. Not only is the Hebrew archaic and poetic, but circumstances that surround the narrative, the narrated events, are clouded and mysterious. That's to say the least. There are words that are only found here and of which the meaning is not clear. Balak, king of Moab, is no problem. No, go back to the picture. Not yet. Balak, king of Moab, is no problem. He is considered the enemy of Israel, and Balak means devastator. But Bilam is another story. Is he friend or foe, prophet or sorcerer, worshiper of Israel's God, or pawn of the evil one? The sages almost universally consider Bilam as evil. He is referred to as evil Bilam and grouped with villains like Cain and Korah, as he is in the places where he is referred to in the Brit. And we are going to read these passages. Yet he is called the wisest of the pagans and grouped with Job and Jethro in Jewish tradition. Clearly, Bilam is an enigma. On the one hand, Bilam is involved in what appears to be sorcery, while on the other hand, he is engaged in conversation with God and appears to submit to his demands. God apparently puts words in his mouth, much like he does for his own prophets. Yet in the end, Bilam gives counsel to Balak, which brings about Israel's demise. So some background here. By the time the nation of Israel approached Moab, on its way to the land of Canaan, Moab had been conquered by the Amorite king Sihon and had become a satellite territory of Sihon. Moab was terrified by the approach of the Israelites because they had good reason to be terrified from their perspective, because the Israelite had just conquered the powerful king Sihon, a giant, the leader who had before conquered Moab. Now this mighty nation was coming towards them. Therefore, King Balak of Moab sought help from the famous seer Balaam to curse the Israelites. Why Balaam and who is Balaam? So whenever we have a character in scripture just pop up out of nowhere, like Korah taking center stage, without any real introduction of who he is, where he comes from, then there is always a story behind that story in the oral tradition, or the rest of the story, which God in his sovereignty chose not to include in the Torah, in his story, but which has been preserved in other places in the Jewish writings. And there are reasons why stories are not included. For example, not to give too much time and space to that particular person or issue, because too much additional information would distract from the actual point God is trying to make, and to distract from the real issue. Torah is God's selective account of history, his story, for a specific purpose that we may or may not understand. It is to teach us something. And what is it going to teach us? Sometimes we do not understand. Jewish literature, of course, has all the details concerning Balaam. For example, the book of Yashar, and we first meet Balaam in Yashar 61, where he is introduced. And there it says in verse 8, a youth 15 years old, Balaam the son of Beor, was his name, and the youth was very wise and understood the art of witchcraft. So that's who Balaam was, according to tradition, and he was famous. So you can read Yashar chapter 61 for that. Why Balaam? Legend of that time was that whoever was blessed by Balaam was blessed, and whoever was cursed by him would be cursed, for good money, of course. The Midrash relates that the nations of the world came to God and said that if they had a prophet of Moshe's nature, they too would be as holy as the children of Israel. So in order to test them, God gave the nation Balaam as the prophet. So Balaam was a prophet for profit. So when we come across biblical stories like Balaam's, who is confronted by his talking donkey, it is very easy to discard the existence of the person and the whole story altogether as just one of those many Jewish fables. But then something happened that most people have never heard about next. And that is the famous Deir Allah inscription of Balaam. And at the bottom, you see the pile where the scraps were found. And now we have a little video that talks about this. I just wanted to show you where it was found. Okay, the video.
I am standing on an ancient mound in the Jordan Valley, east of the Jordan River, and this is a site that is known locally in Arabic as Tel Der Allah. A discovery was made here which refuted the skeptics who claimed that the Bible is mythology. And this discovery provided evidence that the Bible is not based on mythology, but on history. So the earliest writings in the Bible are the first 5 books, and these are the 5 books of Moses. And they were written at the end of the 15th century BC. And because they're the earliest writing in the Bible, they're often targeted by skeptics who are saying that they're largely mythology. And so in the books of Moses, one of them, the book of Numbers, Moses talks about a seer named Balaam, son of Beor. And at this time, the Israelites are camped out in the Jordan Valley on the plains of Moab. Balak, king of Moab, sends messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, to summon him to come and to put a curse on this people, Israel. And Balaam comes, and as he goes to speak a curse on Israel, a blessing comes out instead because the Lord is speaking through him. So we have Balaam, son of Beor, this seer in the Bible. Excavations took place here at Deir Allah in the 1960s, and they were directed by H.J. Franken. And their most significant discovery here came in 1967. They were digging up here at the Acropolis of the site, and they found the remains of a monumental building which they interpreted to be a temple. And the walls of this temple had collapsed in, and as they were excavating down through these collapsed walls, they noticed pieces of plaster that came from the inside of the wall. And they noticed that on some of these fragments of plaster, there was writing in black and red ink. And so they did the best they could to get these different pieces of plaster that had writing on them and piece them back together. And the inscription that they preserved is one of the feature displays at the National Museum of Jordan in Amman today. So in general, this inscription is very fragmentary, but the first line of it is very clear, and when translated reads, "The sayings of Balaam, son of Beor, the man who was a seer." So compare that, for example, to Numbers 24:3 that says, "And he spoke his message, the prophecy of Balaam, son of Beor." So the same person, the same seer that is talked about in the Bible is also now found independently of the Bible through archaeology, through the excavations in this site, found in an inscription independent of the Bible. So what does this mean? It means that the places and the events and the people that the Bible is talking about are real, and that the truth claims of the Bible are not based on mythology, but on history.
You can stop it here. So there are several videos out there about this archaeological site, but I chose this one because I just want you to, we probably cannot do this. I just wanted to show you how amazing this find is, because you see this huge mound of dirt, and how likely is it to find, I don't remember the exact number of pieces of the plaster that they found, to find these pieces, and one of them having the name of Balaam on it. How likely is that? So this is just amazing. And also another thing, when you look at, or when I show you something, when you look at archaeological sites, you see a pile of dirt, a mountain of dirt, and to dig this up is bucket by bucket, one bucket at a time. So this is incredible work that people are doing, especially if you think of huge archaeological sites like in Egypt or in Iraq, for example. Okay, so one more bit of information, and I think then we have to stop. So this find here, this represents the first Old Testament prophet to be dug up in Bible lands. Not his tomb or his skeleton, but a text about him. Not an Isaiah, not a Jeremiah, not an Ezekiel, or any one of the big names, but Balak. The text also represents the first prophecy of any scope from the ancient West Semitic world to be found outside the Old Testament, and the first extra biblical example of a prophet proclaiming doom to his own people. So, fact is, Balaam the seer apparently had such a good reputation that the author of the inscription found it worthwhile to be preserved for generations to come. And I end here. I still have more, but I think we have to postpone this to next week. And I say Amen and Amen.